Good morning, everyone. I'm Asha Nayaswami, and here we are again. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, we offer our lives in devotion and service to your divine cause of self-realization for all. Be with us. Make your presence known to us, that when we make decisions, when we take actions, when we speak, when we think, when we feel, that we will always feel your presence behind every action that we take, that we will always know that we are not alone, but we are instruments of your love, of your joy in everything that we do. Om, peace. Amen. We're having a little series now about the masters of this particular line of gurus. And I've talked for several days introducing it and spoke somewhat about Jesus. So today we want to talk about Babaji. Babaji is really the most astonishing character in Autobiography of a Yogi. By this point in my life, some 50 plus years after I first read Autobiography, and after having spent all of my lifetime contemplating his reality, it's become something that I simply accept as true. But I still remember how I think the phrase is mind-blowing, which was also the phrase that was common at the time when I read Autobiography, just how astonishing it is even to consider, first of all, that there is a being who has so much control over the powers of the universe that he can simply maintain his body forever, for as long as he chooses. The body doesn't age. He's immune to all of the normal things that we take for granted that affect human life. Babaji lives within the material world, but completely outside of it. And even more profound, and just, how do we think about this? That he, with other Himalayan masters, has this all-pervading understanding and relationship of the world, and he has a job, and his responsibility is to work for the gradual enlightenment of all individual human beings and to help planet Earth, and who knows what other planets he may also work on, sort of through its constant cycle of the Yugas, presently an ascending age, coming upward into higher states of consciousness, but still in an extremely dangerous position as technology gives us powers of destruction and moral development lags behind. Babaji and Jesus together are working to ensure the salvation of the whole planet. So we don't exactly know, even where to put those thoughts. Then you read in Autobiography of a Yogi how Master says anyone who says the name of Babaji with devotion attracts to himself an instant blessing. Now, we have this word omnipresence, omniscient, omnipresent. But to actually think that wherever I am, anywhere on the planet, or even outside of this planet, wherever I am, if I call with reverence to Babaji, Babaji will know and Babaji will respond. I mean, that alone, if we even have a modicum of faith in that, is really quite something. And then there's another part that I really enjoy, just being an American. Master talks about in Autobiography of a Yogi how Babaji lives in the Himalayas with a band of exceedingly advanced disciples, several of whom are Americans. And that just makes me smile every time I think about it. Were they born in Ohio? Are they from Minnesota? How old were they when they went to the Himalayas? How old are they now? Did they go to school? Do they have college degrees? It's just like when I start thinking about the life that I'm living, the life that people I know in this country might have lived, and that life could lead you all the way to being part of Babaji's band in the Himalayas. It makes it stunningly in the moment that this isn't something that's far away. This isn't an exotic reality. It's a perfectly natural state of being. It just doesn't happen to be mine. And that's also an important part of understanding what Babaji has to give us in this world, because he shows us quite simply what's possible. And even more than that, he shows us what is inevitable for all of us. And Babaji, in Autobiography of a Yogi, Babaji has a sister, Mataji. Baba means father, so Babaji simply means respected father. She's called Mataji, which means respected mother. And there's this whole incident described in Autobiography of a Yogi where Babaji is thinking about discarding his physical body, and Mataji calls him to her, and I love that part of it too. She calls him, "Brother, I need to talk to you." And she emerges from an underground cave at the Dasa Samit Ghat, floats in the air, and one of Lahiri's disciples has been called there to witness it. And Babaji and Mataji have this discussion about whether Babaji is going to shed his physical body. And Babaji says, he makes the mistake of saying, "What difference would it make?" And Mataji seizes upon that and says, "Well, if it makes no difference, then why don't you just keep it?" Now, what on earth? Well, the phrase "what on earth," we say that it is an exclamation, but what on earth doesn't really hold for this. What in all of creation are they even talking about? Are they even doing? Mataji lives in an underground cave at Dasa Samit Ghat there in Varanasi. Babaji lives in the Himalayas. Sometimes they go from peak to peak by ordinary methods. Sometimes he just says, let us pick up our staff and walk. And they just pick up and they suddenly are transported by astral travel means to another place. But what all of this does is it reminds us of how temporary and tiny the realities that we're living are now, and how possible it is completely to transcend all of this and live in another reality. When I was 10 years old, I remember standing in the big picture window of the house that we lived in, 3809 Hillcrest Drive, El Paso, Texas. And I looked not directly across the street, but to the man there, whose name I no longer remember. And he was mowing his lawn. And I was just staring. And I remember I stood there for a very long time, just staring at him. And there was a thought in me that if I concentrated deeply enough, he would dissolve and the reality behind him would show. Now, there was nothing in the context of my life at that point that would cause me even to have any reason to think like that. But somehow I knew that what I was looking at was not really the truth of what I was looking at, and that there was something else behind it. My belief at that time was that all the adults around me knew, and when I got to be a certain age, some kind of a ritual like the bat mitzvah of a Jewish girl, which I never had, but I could have had. After that, they would tell me. It was a matter of some extreme concern to me as I got older, and I realized that none of the adults knew either, that they were all just flailing in the dark, just like I was. That was, in a very quiet way, that was terrifying for me. Fortunately, before I was 20, I was rescued by Swamiji and Vivekananda and Yogananda and Ramakrishna, so I didn't really have to go into adulthood with that fear. But I knew there was something else behind it. It was amusing to me quite recently. I was more or less doing the same thing, staring out the window of my kitchen, just looking into the garden in the back, just with the same feeling I had when I was 10. Why can't I see what's really here? And you see, that's what Babaji tells us. Babaji tells us that we need to be able to see what's really here. Because if we just continue to operate as if this were reality, well, it doesn't work out very well for us. Now, there's another aspect about Babaji, which is sort of fun. Babaji is like the supreme commander of the whole group. Swami tells a story in The Path about Master. Master scolded one of his disciples, and the disciple felt that in some way Master hadn't quite understood him. The disciple went into his meditation room and was praying to Babaji. Then Master burst into his meditation room and said, "No fair going over my head." Just like that, because Master himself, when Master was asked, why did you do certain things the way you did, specifically why when you say you're representing all religions, do you only talk about Christianity and Judaism? Well, the reason is that in talking about those two, essentially all other true religions are swept into it. But what the answer Master actually gave was, this is what Babaji wants from me. And Master often explained what he was doing, that this is what Babaji wants. So we think of Master as being, fully God-realized Master and being in charge of his own destiny, but it hasn't been passed down to us, except more through Swamiji, the extent to which Master deferred both to Sri Yukteswar, who was the immediate physical guru for him, but even Sri Yukteswar was acting on behalf of Babaji. In Autobiography of a Yogi, again, it says Sri Yukteswar meets Babaji at the Kumbh Mela, and Babaji says to Sri Yukteswar, "I am going to send someone to you." And there's an implication there which Master actually spoke to directly, which that Babaji was his actual guru, and Sri Yukteswar was acting on behalf of Babaji. Why did Sri Yukteswar train Master? Because it was Babaji's will that he do so. So we have this constant reference to this overarching force. We know even when Swamiji when he was right in the middle, I think at the worst point of all the persecution that we went through the courts, which lasted for 12 years, two separate legal actions, but they were really one action, which was an effort basically um, uh, to disempower Swamiji as a disciple, to disgrace him as a disciple, and therefore to remove any alternate interpretation of Master's teachings to the one that one organization had. It was your typical religious monopoly effort, which failed because, fortunately, religious monopoly is illegal in America, which it would have been helpful if the people who filed the lawsuit had thought it through more carefully. But nonetheless, that's what happened. But at the nadir of that, Swamiji was being attacked on every level from all angles. And he was strong in it. But when that much force comes, it behooves a person to go inward and ask God, what do you want from me? I mean, it's one thing, and we can and we should strengthen our spines and stand up for what we believe, come what may. And on the other hand, it's wise to say, clarify for me, Lord, if I'm missing the point. So Swamiji went into a very deep state of introspection, asking, if any of this was a sign that in some way, and this is that his work was displeasing to God, because he had done it for no reason except as a gift to Divine Mother and to Guru. And if it wasn't pleasing, then he wanted to stop. But the whole point of this, he was on an 8-hour train ride up into Switzerland from Italy. And he said he meditated the entire time, and here's the point, he prayed to Babaji, because it was the overarching authority for all of this work. And what that also speaks to is the fact that we have a relationship, or we can have a relationship with each one of these masters. And even though Master was teasing that disciple, no fair going over my head, Master was also saying, of course, we have a relationship to all these masters. anyone who says the name of Babaji with deep devotion. And so there are just times in our lives when we just feel that the consciousness that Babaji represents. And the fascinating thing about each of these masters is that they're individual jivas, and that at some point, and with a soul, a being like God, Babaji, you don't even know how to think about it. But he wasn't a special creation of God. He wasn't manifested from Satchidananda as Babaji. Somewhere back in time, he had an ordinary human birth, and he had a cycle of self-realization. And there was a time when he lived through everything that we live through. And that to me is so astonishing to contemplate. And it's one of the facts that gives me comfort. And it even gives me more comfort when I think about Babaji. Whatever vibration of consciousness I'm stuck on. Now, he might not have had exactly my circumstances, my exact temptations, my exact weaknesses, but each of those represents a vibration of consciousness. If one could see it, you could see it. It would have color, it would have sound, because it's a vibration of consciousness between delusion and perfection. And Babaji had to have passed through that same delusion. Every one of our gurus passed through that same delusion. So when we are in that state, this is not foreign to them. They don't look at this and think, oh, how terrible you are, how stupid you are. It's exactly as I often describe the apple seed becoming an apple tree. There's a point in which there's very little strength there. There's a point in which it's very vulnerable, but it's absolutely simply necessary. There's no way to get from delusion to perfection except through this vibration. So when I find myself in a position that I don't understand, sometimes Babaji he's just the one because of his tremendous distance from ordinary life. Just the opposite of Lahiri, who I'll talk about tomorrow. Lahiri lived about as ordinary a life as you can imagine, and you have Lahiri as a disciple of Babaji. Now, of course, Lahiri's life was nothing but ordinary, but the form of Lahiri's life was completely mundane. The form of Babaji's life is completely exotic. And yet they share a consciousness and they share a mission. But the mere thought of Babaji living in the Himalayas, a deathless master living in the Himalayas, who yet, as autobiography tells us, is aware of what's going on in our society right this moment and is planning the salvation of this age. So then you pray to Babaji, I pray to Babaji. How can I help? Recently, and it's still a bit ongoing, we've been in a bit of a kerfuffle about our community here. It's been privately owned. It is privately owned. Economic conditions change. Is it still viable for it to be privately owned for the individuals who own it, who've been very generously supporting this community for years? Is that still viable for them? What is the right way to go? I've spent 15 years trying to sort this out. And a few years ago, I made some efforts to take some direct action to try to create understanding, which did not create understanding. I absolutely did not know what to do. I really had no idea what to do. And it's not personal. So, if one is in a situation where it's a matter of personal sacrifice, then you can make a decision. But it's not personal. It's Master's work. It's not mine. I mean, it's not my possession. It's Master's. So I was sitting in Kriya, just in a Kriya initiation, just completely beside myself. I just could not think what to do. It's nice to talk philosophically about accepting God's will, and that's a really good idea. But if you have to make decisions, you have to accept God's will, but then you have to understand what God's will is. And in the middle of the Kriya, it just came to me: give the community to Babaji. It's like the problem is just too big. It's too big for me. I don't know what to do with it. So the only thing I could think of to do is we should give it to Babaji. And so every year on September 12th, which is around September 12th, which is the anniversary of the day Swamiji was initiated by Master. So it's really the birthday of Ananda in a real sense. because when he became a disciple, that's when this started. So we always have a, literally we call it Celebrate Ananda. It's our big birthday party. We celebrate that we exist. At the end of that, which was, it's still warm weather where I live, and outdoors, we built a big fire in the center of the community in a big copper cauldron, a metal cauldron right there. We built a big fire with real firewood. And we had however many people we had in this community. And we dedicated it to Babaji. We just gave it to him. And I must say, I've been part of Ananda for many decades, and that was one of the most powerful ceremonies I have ever been part of in any context at all. There was just something so extraordinarily real about, if you say the name of Babaji with devotion, you will attract to yourself an instant blessing. And we had the fire, we just threw the karma into the fire, just with everything that we had. Now, interestingly, the situation got worse and is still, given the pandemic that we're dealing with in 2020. There's no resolution, but there's been a lot of movement. And I just say to myself, we gave it to Babaji, and we really did. We said in the prayer, you who have manifested a golden palace in the Himalayas can probably solve this problem too. Why not? I mean, I'm laughing in a happy laugh, because of the freedom that it gives us when we really practice these teachings. That's a great deal of what, well, let me say that differently. The entire trick of the spiritual path is to remember to practice the teachings. I was doing some work for Swamiji. This was in 1979, when he went to live in San Francisco to help start the Ananda House, which was a wonderful work that Jyotish and Devi ran there for a number of years. And that lasted about 10 or 12 years. And then when Palo Alto got stronger, and Palo Alto's about 40 minutes south of San Francisco, the work was built around this fabulous 45-room mansion that we had there. And the house was sold, and we couldn't rent it anymore. So that dissolved, and it all dissolved into the community here. Now, let's see, where was I with that? Oh, yes. And during that period of time, Swamiji got his own apartment, and he did a lot of recording at that time. And I can only say he had to scrape the bottom of the barrel, because I was his recording engineer. And it was a 4-track tape. Reel to reel is what we did. And it was a very simple setup, just one microphone, but it's really not, I have no intuition for that sort of thing. I did it entirely cerebral. I had no intuition, but nonetheless, we did. And he would often record after his classes. So we'd get back to his house at 10 o'clock at night, and then he would start recording. And he made an album of chanting. It was called Music for Meditation then. I don't know what it's called. It exists. It's been reissued. And one night we were there, and I could not get the sound to stick to the tape. I just couldn't get it to stick. And so Swami's there. Okay, can we start? No, sir, not quite. I can't quite do this. And then he went to meditate for a while. He came back. No, sir, I can't quite do it. I futzed around. I tried to call people. Nobody answered the phone. I couldn't figure it out. Finally, at some point, I said, Divine Mother, if you want us to record, you're going to have to help us. And I pulled out every plug, and then I put every plug back in exactly as I had put it, and it worked. Maybe there was a practical reason. Maybe a plug wasn't quite in, but believe me, I had checked. So the next night, Swami's giving a big talk about superconscious living. And just in the middle, or not in the middle, but at a certain point, he says, Asha has something she wants to share with you. Sure, sir. So I just walked up, and then when I got there, I said, what? And he said, just tell them what happened last night, because I had explained it to him. So I went through what I just went through, and then I gave him the answer, because I knew what Swami wanted me to say. I said, everything Swamiji is telling you will work. The only thing you have to do is to remember to use it. Why did it take me an hour to just say, Divine Mother, if you want us to record? You see, that's it. And we have to do it not flippantly, but deeply. And so you also have to use this very, very consciously. I read, there's something that had made me uncomfortable, and I finally read an explanation. I don't even know who said it. You should take the name of the Guru at all times, but you should always take it, you should not use it casually, is what he said. Because then when you really want to call upon the Guru, it will become too ordinary a word as it comes out of your mouth. Now, if you can always say the name of Babaji with deep reverence, it's the only word you ever have to say. You know, there are great sadhus who never say anything but Ram, 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 because every time they say it, it's with deep reverence. But if we're getting Babaji to get us a parking place and to find the right, fresh corn for the recipe that we want to make, if you really are living in that state of grace, then by all means do so. But don't let it just become a habit that becomes unconscious. If you're ever going to say it, always make sure that you are present with it, because he will feel that. You see, Babaji doesn't hear our words. He feels the heart. And even in Autobiography of a Yogi, it's told, because as soon as Lahiri Mahashaya left Babaji, and Babaji had said to him, whenever you call me, I will come. Then Lahiri met some friends of his. Lahiri told them about his great adventure in the mountains, and they didn't believe him. And Lahiri said, oh, well then, I'll go into this private room here, and I'll show you that it's true. So he went into the private room. He called to Babaji, and Babaji materialized in front of him. And Babaji said, when I told you I would come whenever you called, I didn't mean for trifles, to prove to these skeptics that I exist, he said. So from now on, I will come not whenever you call me, but whenever you need me. And then, though, Babaji said, but I don't want to embarrass you in front of your friends. So Babaji stayed long enough for them to realize that this yogi had materialized in a closed room. And it's very interesting, Babaji asked the hostess to cook some sweetmeat for him. And, Jesus, when he materialized after he died, when he resurrected in front of his disciples, he cooked fish, and they broke bread and had fish together. It's like the Master comes and he wants us to understand, this is not a vision, this is not an illusion. I am here. Let's sit. Let's eat food together, so that you really know that he is as much with us as I am with myself. Just the wonderful thing about this path is that there's just endless avenues for deep, inspiring prayer and meditation. It really just never ends. And if we get a little stale on one side of it, you just move over and begin to think about it. Who are those Americans who live with Babaji? Could I be one of them? Could they even be distant relatives of mine? Do they have an American name that's similar to my own? And if they could do it, why not I? If not in this incarnation, then in one that comes. If that is your heart's desire, then say the name of Babaji with reverence and continually attract to yourself a deep and instant blessing. God bless you, my friends.